That's a rather middle-of-the-road word. But you know what I'm talking about now. But I won't keep saying mystical. There are those that are amateur. That is, they're faux, they're sham, and I don't really mean that as in any way pejorative. They simply cannot produce that which they promise. It's not their job. There are those sorts of mystical systems, and then the otherwise. Everything that's publicly known, everyone you've ever heard of, is in the former group by its very nature, or it would not be known. You would have never heard of it had it not been some form of amateur night. It's not that the people involved are idiots or fools, and it's not that they're under the sway of some charismatic, maniacal cult leader. It's simply, to them, it's a hobby. And some of them will insist it's a serious hobby, and they may try to calculate the thousands of dollars they spent on metaphysical books in their lifetime. But they wouldn't be understanding just what I'm telling you. If that was the basis of the proof of their interest, there is proof contrary. Because by now, they shouldn't have spent thousands of dollars, no offense to anyone, but you know, a few hundred, maybe a book or two. If you're really sharp, a book or two. And it's not that you become a traducer of people who write such books, but you simply understand that they're serving food that's got nothing to do with what your hunger is. You tried it, and that's not it. By its very nature, any apparent mystical system you ever heard of, to the grand names of Zen, Sufism, all sorts of things, to any individual cult, they are all, if you've heard of them, they are all non-operative. They're non-operative because they are known. And that's it. There is no exception to it. They are serving a purpose for man collectively. They act almost, in the same way since I've used it, as a kind of pressure valve. Because life, the balance of life on this planet right now, is not such as to need, much less tolerate, but need covers it, any great deal of stray effort. If you look at man as being this great herd intellectually, they do not need too many stray calves running off out here by themselves. They do not, life does not have any need for many mystics. Life does not have any need for people, individual people here and there, who in some way, how about I go ahead and be blunt, discover the secret of life, or discover what's going on. Secret of life, somebody already used that, and I don't have to pay royalties. Which is what the enlightenment is, which is what the awakening is, which is what a higher state of consciousness it is. It's like the experience. If we'd like to move ourselves up into the ranks of Satori and enlightenment, it is when it happens in your nervous system, you look around and you go, that's it, for the time being. That has always been the purpose. But if someone feels that need and they attempt to fill it through any publicly known, any known apparent system to produce that, it will not. And if they stay there, there's nothing wrong, because this is certainly in no way a criticism of ordinary activity in that area. Do you want to leave? Sir? I won't bother you. You can leave. You know, anybody gets enough, get them to leave, I guess. There is no way to describe specifically what fulfilling that dissatisfaction here is. Now, having said that, I can in fact shave some of the apparent gross negative nature of that away on this basis. Remember, all of this we're dealing with the mind. We're not dealing with a conspiracy. There is a great conspiracy, for those of you that like that, but you're not even close. I mean, if you think it's bankers and communists or socialists or Royal Canadian Police or lumberjacks wearing women's underwear, the conspiracy is so widespread, the conspiracy is life itself. The conspiracy, well, I'll give you a hint, I wasn't getting into it, Consider the idea of right brain, left brain, inside of your skull. Your skull. There's a conspiracy. Now onto something that might even make sense. That is to say, life is a conspiracy. The systems that would seem to be available, things that have been known, are all for one purpose. No matter what they're called, the purpose is to produce something new in an individual man's consciousness. Now, I could call it other things. It is simply a function of the brain, which is all you are right now. That's no reason it makes you Fred or Mary or Sue. And to believe otherwise is to have a hobby. To believe that you're an individual person in some way with a spark of God, you're a spark of life, but to think that there is a heart allegorically in you, that there is something actually of worth to divide man into things like his body, his mind, and his spirit. The nervous system of man explains man, if you can see it, in the same way that the nervous system of a cat explains a cat from beginning to end. There's nothing about a cat that a good zoologist cannot understand. A medical doctor, a physiologist can understand all there needs to be known about a sparrow, about a warthog, about a cat from his nervous system. That's it. Same with man. The mind will tell you otherwise because that is part of its job. The mind will insist otherwise, and this is not to diminish man, because there's nothing comparable. But until you see what the situation is, nothing is possible other than a hobby. The ordinary attempt to discover what's going on in life, that is to say, the ordinary apparent systems, schools, philosophies, traces of great secret works, one and all must present man with an opposition. It details an opposition. I'll refer you back again to the, if you want a crude version, the left and right hemisphere of man's brain. If you like it another way, it is ordinary consciousness perceives our existence as being a three-dimensional one, and it is run intellectually through binary energy. There is where the conspiracy is. There is why anything that is said to man, he must be able to push against something else to even perceive of it. At the crude level, there must be somewhere to lean. For every up, there must be a down, etc. But into areas that would seem to be a bit more promising, not as quite as routine, even those, obviously religion, but into the areas that would appear to be, that you hoped were, that promised they are, some refinement of religion, some higher level of religion, that is mystical systems, mystical schools of some sort. They still must present man, when I say man, I mean here, with an opposition. If you want to go ahead with the words, if we take the attempt to discover what's going on, the attempt to awaken, to reach the enlightenment. Let's take a nice physical, in some of your lifetimes, the idea of the Orient Express, that great train running from Paris to Istanbul, and the idea that we have sophisticated Parisians, when it was in its real heyday in the 30s or 40s, and the idea that they were going to leave the great city of lights, the center of civilization, take all of this allegorical, I could view something else. But here they're going to go from Paris, and the idea, the way it sounded, of traveling through exotic areas, the Eastern Europe, into the Balkans, over there to the edge of the Mediterranean, and then finally to that strange, fascinatingly described city of Istanbul, the Enlightenment, another state of awareness, another state of understanding. You've got everyone dissatisfied with Paris. They're dissatisfied with Paris physically, but that can be cured. Every day, it must be cured. They're dissatisfied with being in Paris, that is their present position, intellectually. At the other end of the nervous system, the higher end. But they do not know how to satisfy it. You cannot feed the mind. People try, as I pointed out. And those that find it satisfactory, that they keep reading books, or that they simply get a new degree, they continue their education, that is fine. Everything gets what it needs. If you have a stomach that desires more protein than it does chocolate, then you'll find it. And if a person is satisfied, if someone heard me speaking right now and said, well, I understand intellectual dissatisfaction, now it's always bothered me, I've been a student of life and a student of all the arts and the sciences, etc. And they could say, but and contrary to what you just said, that is me, they could say, well, every time I learn something new, every time I read a really good book or take up a new subject, I do feel satisfied. So be it. They're correct. If they say that, they are correct. The few do not find it so. As I said, you should have already been through that. It's no attack on education. It's no attack on anything in life. But the few, there they stand in Paris, and they cannot even be satisfied at all, and rather than find it, to settle for it being an irritation, they just learn to live with it, and they take up religion, which I'm sure many of you did. You tried religion, that didn't satisfy it. But rather than just find it to be sort of background irritation, which is about what it becomes with ordinary people, with good, sane people, even if they heard me speak, they might go, you're right, intellectually, if you want to call it dissatisfied, I do feel dissatisfied. Sometimes I wonder, and they would start some string of personal anecdotes about local affairs. They say, yeah, I'm intellectually dissatisfied because, for instance, and the great one is, how can people do such unpeople-like things? How can good people, how can decent people, how can other humans act so inhumanely in this example, and right over here? The mythical journey is not to cure any ills, because from the mythical view, man has no ills. That's just it. And so you've got the few standing there in Paris, back to that one, the few, I'm insinuating, would be mystics. They've tried a little bit of everything. They've tried enough of religion, they've tried enough of reading, train schedules, brochures about Istanbul, brochures about Bulgaria and Transylvania, and they'd sit there and go, oh, boy, that must be great. And that's part of the purpose of the mind, very small, but that's one, is that if man's mind here and there does get too involved with being dissatisfied with the status quo, with the collective reality, it's arranged to where most people can then be satisfied if they just have a few names. That is, many would-be mystics are satisfied if they can hear some sort of new terms about mysticism. Or if they read a new book that says, boy, you would-be mystics of the 20th century, you missed it. The real great heyday of mysticism has never been heard of, happened in the late 1800s in Peru or in Australia. And people just read it and almost have mental orgasms like, oh, you know, boy. Well, it is a fine story, like, oh, if I could have just been alive when Buddha was. Now, why am I doing wasting my time in a New Age bookshop or listening to this kind of stuff? Listen to that guy. Oh, if I'd just been there when Muhammad or when Moses or Abraham or Jesus. Oh, boy. If I could have only seen Babe Ruth actually bat. But you do know that the mind says, you know, there's no connection between the two. There's no comparing the two. I know that. I stand, what you call it, struck out, corrected. Even those dissatisfied, there would be mystics, those who might make some extraordinary effort in Paris. You've still got to give them something to start with that has the appearance of being some opposition. You have got to, in some way, not convince them, because they're already dissatisfied, remember. And I'm speaking about, we're assuming people like you, speaking generically, that are interested in something and they're past the point of worrying about, past the point of having any sort of interest, much less faith, in finding nourishment in the ordinary places. You still have got to say something to them. Truth in advertising. You almost still have to. Tell them, point out some reason that they should not stay in Paris, that they should not be satisfied with their condition, no matter what a nice flat they may have and what a nice car and how well they may be established there in Paris. You notice that someone seems to have the potential to travel, to go to Istanbul. To even get their interest, you almost have to say something bad about Paris. You almost have to join in with them, like look around and go, boy, this Paris is not what it cracked up to be. Or if you're good, you can do it even non-verbally. Just kind of look around, maybe cough, and the cars go by like, just, turn up your nose when something, and just look at the person and go, huh? And they go, yeah. In other words, you have to say there is something wrong with your present condition. There's something untoward about where you are. It's just almost necessary. And it's a canard. It's a distraction. It's a lie. Not to ordinary people. And on the other hand, you also have to almost, for sure, say something in favor of that great destination of Istanbul. And sure as hell, if you want to see another distinction between the amateur, the non-functional mystical systems, and the otherwise, but those of you who are taking notes, we've already established, if you followed for the sake of intellectual flim-flam for the night, my argument, it's already established that anything you've heard about is inoperable anyway. But be that as it may. Another way to tell it's inoperable is they will describe to some degree what the state of enlightenment, what a man sees if he were more conscious, what he would think, how he would feel. They will say something specific about Istanbul. I can give you something ironclad guarantee, which costs me nothing. Anyone who tells you what Istanbul looks like has never been there. Because if they've been there, they know better. But you still, I want you to see this kind of interesting, promising conundrum. That the intellect, that is you at your best point, again using you generically as an interested person in something extraordinary, or believe you are, you're on the basis of everything that you hear does not furnish any nourishment. And now you're faced with the fact, again, if you just take it as speculation and try to ponder it for a few minutes, and me saying that if you hear something that purports to be extraordinary, if someone starts talking about another state of consciousness, or they use whatever term you might be currently enamored by, of trying to be awake in a new level, or trying to liberate the mind, whatever you've read about, and if someone says, that's what we're interested in, that's what I'm up to, and some man says, in fact, you want to describe it to you, and if you're using the term that he's familiar with, he's already read the same books as you have, and he will pick up part of it, and he will start describing why Istanbul is a desirable place to go. And you think, yes, it is. Yes, it is. You cannot be driven. You cannot be motivated by that. It will not satisfy because it is part of the collective feeding of man. For the intellect to keep developing, life presents, in a sense, a continuing carrot before this cart of all of civilized humanity. Intellectually, it holds its carrot out, and it keeps trying, it succeeds.